able to locate this exhibit from the North Carolina Botanical Garden, and they were willing to loan it to us for the whole semester. So we're excited about it. I'll turn it over to
All
John.
right. Thank you very much. Okay, so a little introduction. My name is John Dilustro. I'm the Associate Provost of Academic Affairs and Dean of Graduate Studies, and Title IX Coordinator. I'm a biology professor. I am a biology professor. And I'm also the associate editor of a scientific journal, Southeastern Naturalist. But in my heart of hearts, I'm a plant ecologist. So I'm very happy to be involved, and I'm very happy Georgia asked me to participate in the opening of this exhibit. When she told me that it was from the North Carolina Botanical Garden, I said, you know, is Peter White still the director there? And she said she didn't know. And Peter helped us with a project in Georgia. He came down, we cooked him dinner at our house. And then I looked it up and he retired in 2015. So I think I'm probably ready to retire. Probably officially old, and maybe this is it. But anyway, so why do wildflowers matter? Why do we care about them? And I think first we need to define what they are. So what's a wildflower? Wild in this context, we're going to say is a native plant. So something indigenous to an area. And then flower is a bloom or inflorescence on in an organism that's an angiosperm, which is a flowering plant. So we know what flowers are. We know what native plants are. Here you've got the Carolina rose. That's from the exhibit downstairs. So an example of a native plant, North Carolina, the Carolina rose. And in the exhibit, they show you the flower and the fruit. And we always go from flower to fruit. So apple blossom to apple, blueberry blossom turns into a blueberry, rose turns into a rose hip. Very good, thank you. Which is very high in vitamin C. So if you're ever in jeopardy of getting scurvy, rose hips, great source of vitamin C here. But that's the fruit of a rose. On the right here, we've got a Turkish red poppy. We took a picture of during a study abroad in 2009. That's a native plant in Turkey. So that's a wildflower in Turkey. This is a wildflower here. You can grow a Turkish poppy here, but is it a native plant? Will it grow? Yes, it will. Can you grow a Carolina rose in Turkey? Probably. Yeah, so these they grow. We're going to talk a little bit about why it's not ideal in a second. So why do wildflowers matter? I've got some photographs in this. They are poor quality photographs, but they are things I was looking for. So we're going to use them. So this is not a good photograph. 2011, probably iPhone 1, something like that. I don't know. Very old, a little blurry. But it was a trip to the Norfolk Botanical Garden with my family and my mother. And there we saw, you know, monarchs on milkweeds. So we've got a native milkweed, North Carolina wildflower, and we've got a monarch. So there's a monarch. And the reason we're using this poor quality picture is what? What do you see on it? Pollination.
Spot.
It's got a sticker. So there's a citizen science project called Monarch Watch, where every year they put stickers on 250,000 monarchs. And scientists, citizen scientists, will record the identifying information on it. They'll capture the monarch, put the sticker on it, release it, and then other citizen scientists will capture it, record where it is, its information, release it, and so on. So it's a way of tagging them. So the pollination is important. 2/3 or more of the food we eat is pollinated, requires some kind of pollinator, mostly insects. We also have things that are wind pollinated and water pollinated, but mostly they're going to require a pollinator, an animal, an insect usually. That's very important. We have a festival here called I'm looking at you, David, Watermelon Festival. Who pollinates that? Bees. Yep, very good. Not just a historian. So bees are essential for our watermelon festival and for apples and berries and all kinds of things. We know bees are pollinators, but there are other insects that are pollinators too. Wildflowers help the pollination of crops. So they're not just like we're pollinating this milkweed. They help these insects survive and thrive to be able to help us with crops. So native pollinators will help us with maybe non-native crops that we grow, so for food. The other thing that matters about these is that they require little maintenance once they're established, because they've evolved in that environmental kind of area. So the plants that we've grown here, say Carolina rose, has evolved over a very long time to persist here, to be able to tolerate pests, to be able to tolerate the driest drought and the wettest year. Do you think that maybe a flower from Turkey could persist 10,000 years here? We don't know, right? You know, we might be able to grow it for a year or 10 years, but we don't know. So the fact they require little maintenance speaks to the fact they've evolved in this system. All right, here's to continue with the monarch. So this is the migration map of monarchs, and this is its life cycle from the National Park Service. Monarchs migrate over generations. So their migration is multiple generations. It'd be like us going to China, and like our great grandkids are the ones that end up in China. So we start, they reproduce, they reproduce, they reproduce, and those children end up at the destination. So it's a long journey, thousands of miles. You can see the map. That project is doing this, and actually they end up in central Mexico, where they pay local people $5 to find in these trees where the monarchs end. They end their life. They fall out of the trees and die, and they pay $5 for a monarch with a sticker on it. So to kind of complete that cycle, and people do that. But if you think about the importance of like food on this multi-generational journey, they eat specific things. They don't eat one species, but they definitely have things they eat. And there are things they eat that are native that they've evolved with, and there are things they eat that are not good for them. So they may be something that they eat that's not the exact species, but it will, you know, also culture a pest, a disease for it. It's like us eating junk food, like bad food. Everything you eat isn't good. With all the introduced species in North America, everything those guys eat are not good for them. So the native wildflowers are very important for kind of balancing that out and keeping that population healthy. When I was looking at this map, I was thinking about how you'd have to go from patch to patch. Be like taking your kids out and they only eat at Taco Bell. Sorry, my kids love Taco Bell. And they tell you I'm going to die if we don't have a Taco Bell. But in this case, they're really going to die if they don't find a patch of milkweed. And you have to have that continuity. If it's not there, there's no food source. So they're important in that sense. All right. I want to share some bad photography with you once again. So this is a day in May in my backyard in 2010. So another iPhone 1 set of photography. That's not great. I apologize in advance. So I'm doing yard work. I'm growing one single sunflower. So I've got a sunflower, It's a native species to North Carolina. It's a native thing, just single flower. And I'm like, hey, look, there's a bee. So I take a picture of the bee. And I'm probably like taking something, breaking, I don't know what I'm doing, but doing some more work. And then I go over there and I'm like, oh, look, there's a spider on it. Yeah, so I look at that. And then I'm like, oh, hold on. Don't know why that happened. It's so bad. All right, so there's your spider. And then we go with an ant. So this is all about a 2-hour window. And then a couple of leaf hoppers. And then another species of ant. Another species of spider. And a beetle. And then finally another bee. So in 2 hours, I wasn't really paying attention. And if you know anything about looking for insects, you know, you got to look under the leaves. There's a lot of things that live under. I didn't do any of that. I was just kind of walking by and taking pictures. So it wasn't a thorough investigation, wasn't good photography. But I think even as lazy as it was, it kind of documents the diversity of animals that can be on one plant. So on a single plant, in a single span of a couple of hours, one wildflower, you know, is housing a world, really. So we think of, you know, wildflowers as aesthetically pleasing, but it's not just that. They're homes, they're places to hunt, and they're food. So there's an importance of non-tangibles and things that maybe don't come to mind initially, but they really are more than just pretty flowers. So we can illustrate this with the Chuan food web. This is what we have on campus. This is one of the leaves from my helianthus, the sunflower. In the exhibit downstairs, you'll see the statement, no holes, no bugs, big problem. What does that mean? It means, yeah, if you don't have insects eating your wildflowers, you probably are using pesticide. In this case, I was not. It was early in the season, I guess, but you know, I was not spraying my single sunflower with pesticide. So there was no pesticide, but they were looking pretty good. But that's the primary production. That's the food. So the flower, the leaves, the plant is the food. You can think of insects, that leaf hopper as a primary consumer. You can think of a bird as a secondary consumer eating the leaf hoppers. And then, you know, a hawk would be a great example of a tertiary consumer eating the birds. So basically, you know, if you like hawks, you better like wildflowers, right? So they're kind of intimately connected there. All right, the exhibit downstairs, I think, highlights some really important things. And I'm not going to go through trying to, you know, summarize the exhibit because it's a lot to take in, but I'm going to try to give you a little bit of like diversity. So there's a lot downstairs about wildflower diversity, and flowers are different size, shape, smell, you know, color. And this is an example of a flower that bloomed the last time it blooms every 3-5 years. I think the last time it bloomed was 2021 at North Carolina State. In their greenhouse, it's the corpse flower. So what do you think it smells like? A corpse, like rotting flesh. So what does it attract? No.
Zombies.
Probably zombies. I mean, definitely zombies. But in terms of pollinators, it's going to attack carrion beetles and flies. Flies are going to love it, and carrion beetles. So there are insects that it tries to attract to get pollinated, and it works. It smells like a dead body. Not everyone comes running, but some insects do, and they pollinate it, and it works. It is a pretty good thing. It's a tropical plant from Indonesia. They grow it in a greenhouse. But there's some examples of other diversity downstairs that are really interesting. This is not a North Carolina plant. This is a North Carolina map. So another thing the exhibit talks about is connection to place. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but North Carolina is broken up into three physiographic regions: coastal plain, Piedmont, and mountain. So for such a small state, we have it all. Like if I worked for the tourism department, we really do have a diversity of landscape. We've got freshwater wetlands, marine wetlands, mountains, all kinds of stuff. So this is really important in driving the different habitats for all the different wildflowers in North Carolina. And they do a good job downstairs with that. Connection to place. I'll take one of the areas that I have a little bit of experience with. So longleaf pine. This is not North Carolina, but North Carolina is pretty much the beginning of the range of longleaf pine. And historically, longleaf pine went from North Carolina to East Texas. Whole swath. And it was primarily longleaf pine was the major forest type. And it is 98% gone. So it was destroyed in 1931. Wells and Chunk said, the complete destruction of this forest constitutes one of the major social crimes in American history. So we destroyed this forest. And mostly for the naval stores industry, we cut down the trees, which were great for ships' masts. We boxed the trees for turpentine and tar and just got rid of it. Now we've got little patches. There's a little patch by Merchants Mill Pond they planted. Fort Bragg has a lot, some of the best in the state. But these sandhills, they're burned every 6 years. Is that an easy thing to do? No. Do we like fires every 6 years where we are? Do we like fires at White's Crossing at all? No. Yes, we're anti-fire. We don't like fire. So because of that, fire suppression has changed these systems. This was an experimental plot we had where we burn these every 3 and 6 years. And we published a study in 2006 looking at threatened and endangered wildflowers and found that the sites that were more pure longleaf pine and that were burned more frequently supported the threatened species better than the ones that were mixed. So there's a very few that are really pure longleaf pine because they were all mostly destroyed. Some have been maintained. This one, by chance, is at Fort Benning, which has been a military base since 1920. And this is near a firing range. So they've been firing and catching things on fire every other summer since 1920. So it's one of the best patches in the country because it was burned unintentionally before we started intentionally burning them to maintain the species. You may think like fire, this is horrible, it looks bad. In 6 months, beautifully green, you would never know it was burned. Amazing. And the germination that fire causes is not just physical, but chemical. So they use smoke water. You take the native vegetation and burn it and bubble water through it. And that water will cause some seeds to germinate that will not germinate any other way. And we didn't know what that compound was until a guy in Australia characterized it maybe 10 years ago. So but we're working in North Carolina to restore this. And if you know anything about North Carolina, what's the highest honor you can receive as a civilian? The Order of the Longleaf Pine. All right, wildflowers. There's some good stuff with rare plants downstairs, rare wildflowers. Y'all familiar with the Venus flytrap? Nobody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you're not familiar, you might want to read When Plants Attack. It highlights the Venus flytrap. I'm going to do this. Yeah, you can check that out. So the Venus flytrap is native not just to longleaf pine savannas, commonly to longleaf pine savannas, but some other acidic, boggy wetlands, but only in North Carolina and South Carolina. It's not in the rainforest. It's not in Florida. It's nowhere but here. Looks pretty exotic. Its threats are habitat loss. We lose wetlands a lot and poaching. Can you buy this at Home Depot or Lowe's?
Yes. Probably.
Yes. Should you?
No.
Has one of the librarians done this?
Probably.
It's Is she part of the problem? No, she's not, because no, she's not, she's not. All the ones that are grown for like commerce are done through tissue culture, which is typically too expensive for plants, but in this case, it is grown. So that wonderful Venus flytrap that you purchased was grown through tissue culture and not through poaching. No one dug it up and sold it to you unless you bought it in a parking lot. So, probably not, yeah. Interesting thing with the Venus flytraps is they rarely trap their pollinators. So their pollinators are flying insects, and they've evolved to kind of work with them. They don't kill them. Their prey are crawling insects, and that's who they eat. And some people have done studies to kind of like figure that out. Like, how do they get pollinated? And it's through very, close coevolution. And they eat meat for what? Anybody know? No. Good. We eat meat for calories and energy and food. They're eating it purely for mineral nutrition. So we don't get calories out of it. They make their own sugar. They're photosynthetic. But it's hard to get nitrogen from low pH environments where they live. So they're eating it purely for the nitrogen, just the mineral nitrogen, the miracle grow. All right, I hate to end on threats, but it's important that we end on threats. Bee decline is happening. My father-in-law is a beekeeper. He never had problems, and then he started losing hives. There's a lot of reasons for bee decline, mites, all kinds of things, but it is a problem. So bee decline is connected to the things they pollinate, not just our food crops, but the native wildflowers. Also, loss of habitat development. Every time we make anything, a mall, a cornfield, it's less habitat. I have a colleague that kind of chuckled. She wrote a book, brilliant woman from Oak Ridge National Lab, called The Ecology of Roads. Like the ecology of roads. But it really is an important book because roads are fragmentation. So you can have a pristine preserve, and if you put a road down the middle of it, you've now cut it into two. And you put another road, and you cut it into four, and that fragmentation hurts seed dispersal, and it hurts pollinator dispersal, movement of insects, animals, all kinds of stuff. So habitat loss, fragmentation, it's a problem. Fire suppression is a no-brainer. We don't like things to burn. So the only burns that are going now are prescribed burns, which are, really more of a recent development. So we really had a long period of things. And I've been in spots where we've had no pitcher plants, like the Zuni Pine Barrens, pretty close to here, is a longleaf pine preserve, one of the most northern ones. I was involved in a burn there where we didn't have pitcher plants, another carnivorous plant. After the burn, in 18 months, there were a couple patches of them. So even things, when fire's been suppressed for long periods, you can still bring stuff back, but you are losing your window. There's only so much that time can go by before seeds aren't viable and things. And second to last, introduced species. You're all probably familiar with kudzu or Phragmites, or just driving around and seeing patches of some kind of plant taking over. And when these introduced species thrive, they push out the natives and they outcompete them and kind of hurt their populations. So some things grow here and we don't even know, some of the introduced species that are problems now may not make it 100 years, but they can do a lot of damage before that, that time comes in. And the last thing, climate change. The interesting thing about climate change is, as climate's changing, we've documented the movement of animals. So we know some animals are moving with the climate, and it's easy for an animal, right? Trees, a little harder. So if you're a tree, can you move? What if you're a tree that you don't produce a seed for 15 years? And you're a little baby tree. You can't move for 15 years. So the movement of some plants is a little bit more difficult. I will end on a bright note that wildflowers, being annuals, are some of the most robust plants to be able to move with climate change and change their their distribution. So that's a good thing. And that's it. Any questions? I'd like to thank the Botanical Garden and Whitaker Library for taking this. I don't know if I can answer your questions, but I'll try.
Pick the book. Be the person.
Are the wildflowers you buy from seed and you plant, will they come back? Are they?
Okay, good question. And very good question. Super good question. Thank you for that. Plant that. It's almost too good. So the wildflowers that you buy, you have to be very cautious about. Some of them are actually invasives and non-natives that are bad. So you really want to, like, we're giving away very well sourced wildflower seeds. So do pay attention. If you go buy the cheapest wildflower mix, it's probably going to be like invasive non-natives. And then you're kind of part of the problem.
Oh,
So-
burpee mixes.
Yeah, so be careful, not necessarily, but you have to make sure it's local and then just check what's in it. So there are some bad, you can think you're doing good and purchase invasive things. So that's a thing. So thank you. I really needed to say that.
So what we're giving out was grown in Smithfield, North Carolina, and it was specifically mixed as a native North Carolina mix.
And I think that information is on here. So it tells you the species that are in there and you can look them up and it's all above board, good stuff. But not everything is as thoughtful as this is what I'm trying to say. And often the cheapest is not. So yeah, you do want to be cautious with that. Jack, did you have a question?
That was my question.
Really? Okay.
Great minds think alike.
That's an important question. It really is. Well, if nothing else, thank you very much and please go and enjoy the exhibit.
Going
And-
backstairs.
and thank you, guys.
Forward with the exhibit.
See you.